Hey, over the last week or so, a lot of people have been hearing a lot about a very specific new gun. They've been hearing about how wonderful this gun is. I've seen people review it and say it's so innovative, it's so all new, it's such an awesome gun, and I disagree with them completely. And the gun we're talking about today is the Hellcat. Now, the Hellcat is from a company that I would usually not even mention their name. I would refer to them as the company that shall not be named. But today, in the sense of fairness and the sense of impartiality, I will actually call this traitorous anti-freedom asshole company by name. And of course, I'm talking about Springfield Armory. So, the gun we're talking about, the Springfield Armory Hellcat, has been all the rage over the last week or so. And I want to talk about how I disagree with all the people that are saying it's such a great, new, innovative, whatever, blah, blah, blah gun. I mean, I know Springfield Armory sent a ton of free guns to people, not me, of course, obviously, but I just don't see it as being anything special. And I'll tell you why here a little bit more in the video. In fact, I want to compare it to a gun that I think is far better that also just came out, and that is the P365 SAS from SIG Sauer. When you compare these two guns together, I think the SAS is so much better, and I'll tell you why. Now, I will say right off the bat, I'm not interested in either one of these guns, to be honest. I'm not much into this type of gun. I don't really like polymer guns, for one, and plus, I carry a full-size gun. And when I carry a small gun, I want something really small, like a C-Camp or a Rohrball, something like that. These types of guns don't interest me. These guns are for people who don't want to carry a big gun every day. These aren't like deep concealment guns. They're just like really easy to carry everyday guns that are still reasonably manageable. But since I carry a full size, doesn't really interest me, and plus since they're polymer, they don't really interest me. So that being said, I want to tell you here why I would still prefer, if I was going to buy one of them, definitely the SAS over the Hellcat. Now, the first thing I want to talk about is innovation. Now, is the Hellcat innovative? Well, I guess if you consider removing a grip safety, something that's been outdated for a long time, innovative, maybe you could say it was, but I don't see it as anything innovative. I just see it as it has one less thing. Now, it is kind of nice that it's got 11 rounds plus one, and it's a small gun, etc. So if you're looking for that type of gun, yeah, it's got those features going for it. Now, the SAS, on the other hand, I think this gun is really innovative. At least it's done something I haven't seen any other gun do yet. Something that I'm actually kind of excited about. Now, when I first saw the SAS, I was in a live chat and someone said, hey, you got to look at the new SIG Sauer SAS, the P365 SAS. And I looked at it and I said, what? This gun doesn't have any freaking sights. Why would anybody want this gun? There's no sights on it. This isn't a belly gun. It's way too big to be a belly gun. So why doesn't it have sights? I understand why C-Camps don't have sights, but why doesn't this have sights? And as I'm raging on, I'm looking at pictures of it. I look at the front of the gun. I'm like, I can see that there's those speed holes or cuts in the slide, but there's not even a place for a front sight. And I'm like, who wants a gun with no sights? And as I'm saying that, the people in my chat are like, moron, look at the rest of the pictures. Before you make a snap judgment and start bitching. So I start looking at the pictures and I notice it does have sights, just not traditional sights. If anyone remembers the Meprolite FT bullseyes that were at SHOT Show a few years ago that I just loved so much, these are integrated into this gun. The problem with the FT bullseyes, and the FT stands for tritium fiber optic, or actually fiber tritium bullseye sights. If anybody remembers these, I thought they were awesome, but I didn't like how they looked on a gun. They're kind of long, kind of weird looking on the top of the gun. And plus, when you use them, the front sight becomes useless. But since most guns aren't made for them, you have either a hole or a slot that's empty up there for the front sight. So I didn't like them. But the P365 has gotten rid of all those issues. They integrated it into the gun. It's actually part of the rear of the slide. So you've got this FT bullseye sight that's kind of like an old gutter sight on a lot of older guns. And it's got that little circle with the dot you line up in the middle of it. And since it's powered by tritium and fiber optic, it's always visible. That's awesome. That's a truly snag-free slide there. That to me is really innovative. It's really awesome. I've always wanted to use this sight, just didn't like the look of it. Now it's actually built into a gun. So if they had a steel version of this or did this on some larger guns, I would be thrilled. Hopefully that will happen in the future. So when it comes to innovative, I think the SAS has it all over the Hellcat as far as innovation goes. So once you get that out of the way, you just have to look at the quality of both guns. Now, like I said, I'm trying to be impartial here. I'm not a huge Springfield Armory fan, but I'll admit their guns are definitely serviceable firearms. But I don't think it's a very good gun, to be honest, compared to the SAS especially. Because if you look at them face to face, not a lot of difference between these two guns. They look very similar. In fact, you might just go, well, other than the fact that this one doesn't have sights on this side, like I did when I first saw it, you'd think they were very similar guns. But really, when it comes to how they're built, they're completely different. If you put them side by side, but then line them up in a way that actually shows you some true relationships of the gun, like you put them to where the triggers are lined up, trigger to trigger, well, then you start noticing some big differences. To me, the biggest of the differences is that big honkin' slide on the Hellcat. Springfield Armory has always had a really tall, top-heavy slide with a high bore axis that I've never been really fond of. And in fact, if you look at these two guns lined up trigger to trigger and you look at the bore axis of both guns, you'll see that the Hellcat bore axis is much higher. It's very noticeably higher, and that's going to make a huge difference in this small of a gun when it comes to recoil. Now, I know some people try to say that that extra height in the bore axis doesn't make that big of a difference because you grip the Springfield so much higher, but that's not really true. If you look at these two guns back to back, one thing you will notice if you line the slides up bottom to bottom, there's more slide on the Springfield than there is on the SIG. So there's definitely more weight up top on the Springfield Armory, on the Hellcat. But not only that, you'll notice if you look at the sweet spots of the two grips where the meat of your hand is really going to hit that gun, they're pretty much the same. There's just a slight difference. It definitely doesn't make up the difference for that higher bore axis and that extra weight above your grip. The only real difference that makes it look like it's so much higher on the Hellcat is because it has much more of a swoop up on the actual beaver tail. That isn't really going to change the grip on the gun much, and it isn't going to make up for that higher bore axis and that larger slide putting more weight above your actual grip. And there's also one other big problem that comes from that design flaw of the Hellcat where there's more gun above your actual grip than there is in the P365 SAS, and that is the grip itself. Being able to grip the gun has a lot to do with how shootable that gun is, how well you can control that recoil from that heavier slide. And with the Hellcat, which has the heavier slide, you've got less grip. It's a two-finger grip. Even though it holds one more round, it's a two-finger grip. It's going to be much harder to keep control of this gun. If you look at the SIG Sauer, even though it has one less round, it's got a three-finger grip. It's got a much better grip on it than the Hellcat. It's going to be much easier to control. I would gladly give up the one extra round to have that far better grip. And when you add that better grip with a lighter slide that's not as high above your hand, you're going to have a gun that's much easier to control. But even though the SIG is a little bit bigger in the grip, both guns, when you look at overall height, are pretty much exactly the same. So they're going to carry the same and they're going to print the same. So in conclusion, when you look at both guns, the SAS gun is just better. The SIG Sauer gun puts more of the size where you want it and less of the size and weight where you don't want it. And the Springfield Armory gun puts less of the size where you want it and more of the size and weight where you don't want it. It's just not as well made a gun. And then when you take into account also that really cool integrated sight on the SAS gun, I think the SAS is the clear winner as far as I'm concerned. And in fact, even though I think that the Hellcat is probably the best gun that Springfield Armory makes in this line of guns, I'm still going to say, to me, it just seems like a subpar import Croatian gun that they charge too much money for.
Oops.
Go ahead. It's the lady at 46 South Road. 46 South Road.
Greenfield. One call, retone that please. 10-4. Captain 4 to go to that location. This is 1-9, is that correct?